Well, educators are the profession that creates all of the other professions. And
Yeah.
so you spoke about the impact that a positive or a negative experience can have on a child in school. And we want all of our children to have a positive experience in school. And educators are also human beings. So we need to have an environment where we feel that we have the time and the resources to do the work that we're there to do.
Hi, everyone. It's Christine Miles. Welcome to Shine a Light. It is my pleasure to welcome Julia Bialeski today. Welcome, Julia.
Thank you, Christine. Thanks for having me.
So, 20 years in public education, serving as a teacher, instructional specialist, assistant principal, principal, and district leader, which gives you deep depth and lived understanding of what it means to be a leader at every level. You certainly, that's a lot of roles. And I don't know how old you are, but you don't look like you could have had that many roles. um, you were recognized in 2025 as the recipient of the University of Maryland College of Education's Outstanding Alumni Award. You're the author of Leading with Grace, what a great title, a powerful resource for leaders both inside and outside of education. And one of the reasons I was really excited to talk to you is that you bring leadership to life through story, which is appreciated. Your work is grounded in simple but a powerful mantra to be brave and care about people. Today, you continue to support educators as a keynote speaker, consultant, career coach with a strong focus on well being and authentic leadership. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah.
That was a lovely introduction.
Well, you lived it. I just got to say it. So, so take us into how you got into this crazy world of education.
Yeah. I always thought that I would be a teacher when I was growing up. And like many young people, teenagers entering college, I took a couple of other turns and explored a couple of other things. But when I look back on it now, I realize all roads were leading me back to education. So I thought, do I want to be a nurse? Do I want to be in communications and marketing? And I loved to learn and I loved taking classes in college. I mean, I really went to college to learn and loved all of the different opportunities that I got. But I very quickly realized that I was called to work as a teacher. And my mother was trained as a teacher. She trained to be a high school teacher and then had a family. And after my siblings and I grew up a bit, she became a nursery school teacher. And
She
so I
did it
had
later. She
she
did
did it later, and
huh.
she started, we all went through cooperative nursery schools, and so she started in that role, and then I think she started serving as an aide at the school, and then eventually became the teacher of the 4s and 5s class, and around that time, I'm the oldest of 3, I was in college, and so I had opportunities to work in her classroom. And I just fell in love with those little
Yeah,
kids.
the
There
littles.
was nothing more joyful than going and being around 4 and 5-year-olds every day. And I thought, this is it. I'm going to be a preschool teacher. I've found my calling. And my mother said, okay, but you might want to consider getting your degree in elementary education because you just will have some more opportunities. You
Sure.
know, think about early childhood and elementary education. So I took her advice, which I'm very thankful that I did now because most 19 and 20-year-olds are not
I
always taking their
yeah.
mother's advice. But on this piece, I did. And I graduated with my bachelor's degree in elementary education and served as a classroom teacher. I taught fifth, fourth, and first grades in that order. And then I had the opportunity while I was teaching to also dip my toe a bit into curriculum work and to working with teachers to, at the time, train them in. We used science kits where we had all of these consumable materials and training teachers in how to use those materials to support the curriculum with their students. And that was the first time I got this spark that I really loved working with adults too. I was so
Mhm.
comfortable in front of children and I realized, oh, it's not so scary to work with adults. I get my cup is filled in a different way doing this. So, fast forward a few years, I had a chance to serve as an instructional specialist, which really was a curriculum writing role and professional learning role in our district. And then after that, became an assistant principal. and did that work in 2 different districts, neighboring districts here in Maryland where I live. Our school districts are by county, and served in 2 different elementary schools in 2 districts. And when I came here to my current district, which is where I live, had the opportunity to be promoted into the role of principal, which to date is the most formative
Mm,
professional and probably personal one of the most
yeah.
formative personal experiences that I've ever had.
Can you let's
Um,
go up there. So tell me
yeah.
more. What how so?
Well, in so many ways, Christine, I think the best analogy I can come up with is you work your whole career as an educator. And if you aspire to be a principal, you work with principals, you work alongside principals, you see what principals do, you understand the work. And the analogy I think of is like when you become a parent for the first time. For those listeners who are parents, you know what it means to have a child. You've been around children many
Yeah,
times in your
sure.
life, you've been
Different though.
around babies, but the second you have a baby, something clicks in your brain and you think, I get it. I understand the weight of this responsibility. And I found the principalship to be very similar to that, where I had wonderful opportunities as an assistant principal to work with my principals, to understand what they did. And I really thought I understood the job. And the second that my name was announced at a board meeting as the principal, it was that same feeling like it was when I gave birth to my first child. And I realized that weight of the responsibility of not only all of the students in the community and their families, but all of the staff and ensuring that everyone was okay. And it's what I loved about the job the most. I often say being a principal was my favorite job I will ever have. There will never be a job that I will love that much. But the weight of that job is also very similar, I think, to parenthood. And in my book, I even include a speech I wrote to share with my staff when I was sharing with them that I was leaving the school that was titled Mother of the School. And it
Wow.
was because a kindergarten child once had described my job as being the mother of the school.
What
And
a
so
great title.
I played with that analogy, and she had a lovely drawing of me, as all little 5-year-olds do. And I often wore high heels to work, and so I had these pointy, high
Yeah,
heels on in the picture.
out of the
But
mouth of babes, right?
yes. But the just the it really is a good analogy to me, being sort of the
Yeah.
parent of a school, the carer of all of the people around you.
Well, you
I
don't
also
quite realize the multiplier effect that when you go, when you talk about being a teacher in the classroom and there's 20 students, 20, some schools larger, I know, but then you take that towards the number of classrooms, the number of teachers, the number of families, the number of staff. It becomes, it is, you're leading a community. You're not just leading a school, right?
You absolutely are. I mean, in some ways, you can really feel like you're the mayor of a small town when
Yeah.
you're a principal because everyone in the community, whether they have children in that school or not, is invested in that school, is interested in what is happening in that school. You have this sort of out of body experience where you go to the grocery store or you're at the gas station pumping gas on the way
You're
into
not
work.
anonymous.
And you are not anonymous. You are a
No.
public figure. And most of us in education do not get into education thinking they want to be a public figure. So you have to learn how to navigate that a little bit, which is interesting and often, funny. Like you'll be at the gym or somewhere where you're just not
Yeah.
expecting to
Yeah.
be
You're like,
seen and
yeah.
recognized. And you feel this tingle like someone's watching me and I may not know who they are, but they may have
Well, plus
nieces and nephews.
you have the
Yeah.
students that grow up, right? I
Yeah.
remember I was probably 40 some years old and I'm in a mall. This is when the malls were still open. And in near my hometown. And my third grade teacher said, Christine Telfer, turned around and said, Christine Telfer. And I
It's amazing.
was stunned. That's my maiden name for people that.
Mhm.
And so I mean, first of all, what a special moment. And and I said, "How did you know that was me?" A and B. Well, how? She goes, "Do you remember the good ones?" I just thought she probably says it to everybody, but what an amazing. So it reflects
Amazing.
both ways. You don't want to not see people that because you touch so many lives, and people know you. So there's a level of being on, isn't there?
Yeah, there
Yeah.
absolutely is. I think what you're talking about is really about impact, right? It is true of education and it is true of leadership to me. It is about impact and the impact that you can have on other people. And that's where the weight comes in too. It's the responsibility of the impact that your decisions and your actions can have on other people. And you have to navigate that very carefully, taking the work very seriously and that responsibility very seriously while not taking yourself too seriously at the same time, or you'll drive yourself crazy.
Yeah, I wanna go back to a couple moments you talked about earlier in your life. One, I'm thinking about the fact that you coach educators and career coach, and your mom very gently guided you and became your career coach because she didn't say, "Don't be a nursery
Yeah.
teacher." She didn't say, "Don't," she said, "And," right?
Yeah.
This is an and, not an or. I'm not gonna
Yes.
try to talk you out of doing this. I'm gonna try to show you that this will open more doors if you have this up. If you have this, you can always do one without the other, but you can't do the other without the one. So it seems like it was a pretty interesting way she led you through that moment.
Yeah, I mean, I think that was genius parenting again for, a young adult when you're the parent of a young adult. Now that I am, it's really challenging to navigate those moments sometimes with my teenagers. So kind of suggesting something, but there is a lot of transfer there for how we can coach and mentor others when we're in leadership roles. Our role is not to tell people what to do or to tell people what the right answer is. It's just to maybe open up their mind to see a possibility that they haven't maybe considered, or to give them wisdom and information about, if you did this as well, then here might be some other opportunities. Even if you don't think that's something you want to do right now, it just leaves the door ajar. And
Yeah.
I've really carried that with me, that she did instill in me. I've never quite thought of it through that lens, Christine, but I've carried that with me through my whole career of I am a person who likes to have opportunities and doors open to me, even if
Your
I
mom
don't
knew
know
that.
that I may go through
Yeah.
them. Yeah.
Well, and I would imagine even and the leadership lens too that your mom probably saw in you from an early age. But just to I would argue or maybe state that we all should be coaching as parents, as friends, as principals, as leaders, rather than telling. And that from a young age we can coach and look as someone who doesn't have kids, I can appreciate only from a different vantage point how hard it is as a parent because you're so close to the landscape, they're so close to the painting. But I think these are the moments where coaching works better than telling unless we're in a disciplinary process anyway, you know.
Yeah, I agree with you completely. I think back to what you said about the multiplier effect, the impact and the power of leading someone else to their own decision and building their capacity, whether that's your child or someone who you're working with in a professional context, is going to be so much greater if they get there themselves. Now their capacity is expanded, their world is expanded, and you've kind of laid that foundation for them to make future decisions
Yeah,
based on that.
and trust themselves, yeah.
Yeah.
So still going back, so what was showing up for you as a young person, young kid, little girl, about teaching? You know, what was you said you maybe navigated away from that a little bit, but what was showing up early?
Yeah, I think, your story about your teacher recognizing you in the mall as a full-grown adult is so that resonates so strongly with me because I was a child who loved school. I loved my teachers. I loved to play school. Um, I will say I demonstrated leadership qualities from an early age. On my report cards, it looked like things like I talked too much or I
Okay,
was, maybe telling other people what to do. But I'll reframe now as an adult that I was demonstrating my leadership
sure, sure.
qualities. But I had wonderful teachers throughout all of my schooling who I really do feel saw me and knew what my potential was, often before I had fully recognized that potential. And they gave me really strategic opportunities and to explore that. I've written a book now, and I think about my third grade teacher who we had one like very early desktop computer in the back of our
Oh,
classroom and who set me up on that computer to write a play that we then were
wow,
able to put on as a class. I mean, I see the through line from that experience of someone calling me a writer and telling me that I was a writer and a leader to 40 years later
yeah.
when I decided I think I could write a book. That is something I've always thought I could do, and I bet if I sat down and put my mind to it, I could do it. So I just always loved school. I had wonderful teachers who I really felt saw me, and I wanted to be that for other children, and I just find such joy in being around children. I mean, I don't care what kind of a day you're having, especially young children. If you walk
Yeah,
into an elementary school, you just can't help but smile and
yeah,
laugh and kind of let go of whatever it is that is bothering you. There are stressful moments, there are challenging moments, there are complex problems to solve. All of that is true, but you just gain so much joy in your
yeah.
heart from serving children. So that's really what it was for me, and it allowed me to be in a position where I knew I would always be learning because no
Ah,
2 days were going to be the same. Those complex problems were going to be there. So I was never going to be able to rest on my laurels and rinse and repeat, and that aligns very well with my nature and personality. So I wasn't sure what I wanted to teach. I thought maybe I'd teach high school English because I love to read, and then I realized I think I would really be offended if the high school kids didn't read the book. If they got the Cliff
yeah.
Notes,
You
that
might,
would
and
be
that might happen
yeah,
if I was in your class.
yes. Yeah, that
You
might
have to
happen,
move.
right? I remember high school English too, so I thought maybe I'll just keep reading as a love and hobby of mine outside of school, but really that experience working with those young children
I
in
always
nursery.
think I think it's so interesting because when you take like a third grader and you talk to them individually, they seem so grown up.
Mhm.
When you put them together in a line going into you realize just what little babes they are. And
Yeah,
it's just such a dichotomy of experiences to be around such little kids. And like I said, the things they say, like you're the mom of the school, but we
yeah,
put them together and it's a small, they're so small and so
yeah.
little. So yeah, the other, so you're talking a lot about how positive it was for you and how that inspired you to want to be an educator. I've heard, and you tell me if this is accurate or not, that people go into teaching for two primary reasons. One, because they had this impactful experience with teachers that made a difference, and it was that, or they had a negative experience that they want to make it right for other kids. Is that a fair kind of assessment?
I think so. I think you hit it on the head. Usually you have people who fall into one of those
Yeah,
2 buckets, and when they come together, what you have are people who are really committed to making a difference in the life of a child. When
yeah,
I was a principal, I would always start our daily staff newsletter like that. Some schools would do like a countdown, there's 42 days of school left
yeah,
before the summer, and I would always frame it as you have 42 days left to make a difference in the life of a child
yeah,
because every day is a new opportunity, and whether you had a negative experience growing up or a really positive experience growing up with school, you bring that passion to supporting all children. And now you're surrounded by other like minded people who want to do that. So it just makes a really wonderful, rich, and fulfilling environment to come into every day.
yeah, yeah. I think it's so interesting how formative it is for all of us. School, how it defines us a lot in terms of how we think about ourselves, what we go into. It's such critical work that is so important. And part of what I find frustrating from the outside looking in is how much time is spent. The teachers are expected to get to the metrics of things rather than to the heart of the students. And I know we have to balance both, but can you talk about that and where we are in education and what it means and what we need to do about this, I guess, in part, because it
Yeah.
feels like teachers are not able to do as much teaching the way that they'd like to in many cases.
Yeah. I think ultimately what we need to do about it is as a society, we need to support educators. And I feel that in the last few years we've experienced some increasing challenges in the post-COVID world. I was a first year principal during the COVID year,
Yeah.
the 2019, 2020. So
Bless your heart,
um
as they say, Julia.
n
Bless your
navigating that was a very formative leadership experience for me, and what I really took away from it is that, educators we are the profession that creates all other professions, as they say, and we need to support our educators
say
and
that
our
again.
teachers.
I
Yeah,
think it's really important what you just
yeah.
said.
Well, educators are the profession that creates all of the other professions. And
Yeah,
so you spoke about the impact that a positive or a negative experience can have on a child in school. And we want all of our children to have a positive experience in school. And educators are also human beings. So we need to have an environment where we feel that we have the time and the resources to do the work that we're there to do. So ultimately, as a society, I think everyone can contribute, whether you have children in school, whether you are a taxpayer, whether you are paying attention to local elections and seeing how different candidates' platforms on education may or may not align with your values and beliefs.
yeah.
I think it's really important that we all see that in a democracy, we have the power and the responsibility to really support educators. We also need to be mindful, to your point, of giving them space to do their job and the job that they have gone to school for many years. I mean, if they have a bachelor's degree, they've done it for 4 years, but the majority of people in public education have a
Yeah,
master's degree or
yeah,
higher. And so they have years and years of schooling and experience and expertise that they bring into the classroom. The metrics, as you said, they're necessary. There are certain things we need to ensure that we're doing. We need to make sure we're teaching a curriculum with fidelity. All of these things
yeah,
are very important, but we also need to give our educators a little bit of grace. You know, I
yeah.
like that word. It's in the title of my book, but we need to give educators a little bit of grace because they are human beings, um, and and support them and find out if you are connected to a school because you have children there, because you have a school in your community that you're connected to. Find out what support would look like for them. I mean, it really sometimes is just as simple as a little bit of recognition or appreciation. And I don't mean anything monetary, I truly mean just acknowledgement and appreciation of the work that they do. It really is a service profession. People go into the profession to serve. We said they don't go into the profession to be a public figure or for accolades.
Is
They
it
go into
still
the profession to serve children.
Yeah, I still think there's this kind of perception that it's a 9-month job. They get so much time off. And that's the trade-off of having this intensity. And I think, wow, I don't, I struggle with that kind of thinking because to
Mhm.
me, if you've ever had to be on in front of a room at any point, and then to have these little people and the parents and the administration and the expectations and I mean it's a lot of energy and management, and now with the divergency in learning needs with technology, and whether technology's in the classroom or not, the backlash, it's like everybody, forget the literal term of ADD. We all have technology ADD. We have a rebound effect when we're off it, not just when we're on it. So there's just a myriad of complex things that go so far beyond just we give them a lot of time off is what,
Yeah.
you
And
know.
I think I've certainly always struggled with that line of thinking as well. And I think my reaction to it now in 2026 in thinking about work and the workforce and
Yeah,
how we all interact with work is number one, their pay is commensurate with the number of days and months that they work. And so if
sure.
they were working in any other industry, their pay would be commensurate with that. They'd be receiving pay
Right.
exponentially more, and they receive very little, if any, depending on the district where they are working, leave that they can use at their own discretion.
Well,
And
that's another
so
thing that, yeah.
they're in a very inflexible schedule. And when you think about things as simple as scheduling doctor's appointments, I'm sure you've heard teachers in your life say it's easier for me to go to work sick or for me to not take a day off than it is to do all of the work I need to do to prepare. It is a different type of job where you are up in front of students all day with hopefully a very quick break to eat something in the middle of the day while the children are eating. And if you're lucky, use the restroom. And I'm not exaggerating, it
No, you're
truly
not
is the
no,
life
you're
of a
not
teacher.
exaggerating.
And so then they are often giving of their own time for planning and grading outside of that. And so, when I hear that, the reaction I have is, it would be really lovely if that people who still held that idea in 2026 walked a day in the life,
Yeah,
a day in the shoes
try
of a
this at home.
teacher.
Try this at home.
Yeah, to
Well, I think
experience it. Yeah.
Yeah, I think, well, that's so articulately said. For me, I think when you talk about support, I think the first level of support we can give educators is to truly understand what it's like in their world. Because I think there's been a separation in terms of what we think we've needed to understand. And I hope that post COVID that we've had a different perspective on this w- because of attrition of teachers and because back I was listening to Ron Clark talk one time, who has what's the name of his school is it's failing me, but he's, a leading educator that, women went into this profession in the 60s, 70s, in maybe into the 80s because these were the options we had. It's like Title IX before Title IX in sports, you could play two sports, three. Now you can play pretty much anything. So now that women have other options, women aren't necessarily just going into teaching or nursing, the two that you talked about. And
Mhm.
so we have less people coming into the profession, right? And then we have more people leaving the profession. So
Yes.
and we're not teaching children, we're teaching future workers. I love that you said that. It's like we're not raising boys, we're raising men, right? That's kind of the mentality. So I think it's so important and for educators to also learn to take care of themselves
Yeah.
in the process, right?
Yeah, it's really, really challenging. It's important, and I'm glad that you're elevating it. I think we have both of those problems. We have fewer people going into the profession in the first place through teacher
Yeah.
preparation programs, and we have more attrition. So we have both people who are reaching their if they can retire in 30 years, and 20 years ago they might have stayed until
Yeah.
40. We have people hitting their 30 years and going,
Yeah.
even to stay in the workforce and do other things, but they're
Yeah.
burning out, and we have people who are looking at and saying, this is not a flexible option for me. I do not have a way to integrate my work in life in the way that I need to. And there are other options out there for
Yeah.
me. It makes it really challenging in my current work, which is the head of recruitment for our school district to support our 78 schools, to continuously ensure that we have a pipeline of well qualified teachers that are ready to be in front of our students. And districts all over the country obviously are facing the same challenges, and states and districts are having to get really innovative in thinking through alternative teacher certification programs, incentives that we can give for
Yeah.
people to enter the profession and stay, but it's not keeping pace with the need necessarily, because we have these two truths that are coexisting at the same time, which is that we really need teachers and we need to ensure that people are really highly qualified
Yeah.
and well prepared. And we have to
Sure.
maintain both of those things at the same time, which that's the line we're always walking.
So how are you solving that problem in your own day-to-day recruiting efforts?
I think what I bring into the role, that I've carried with me through all of those other roles that we've talked about that I've had, is connecting with people. And I think at its heart, right, recruiting people for any type of
Yeah.
job, hopefully, is about making a connection with people. It is what would it be? It's a buyer's market out there for
Yeah.
teachers, right?
Yeah.
They have their menu of choices of places that they could go. When I was coming out of school, I was just praying and hoping that I
Yeah.
was going to get a job. It was a very different economy then. And so what I hope I bring and that I build on my team, because my team are the ones really who are out and engaging with
Sure.
undergrad students and members of the community and going to job fairs and things like that, is making that connection with people and helping them to hear your own story and to hear
Mm.
why you love working as
Yeah.
an educator, or more specifically, why you love working in our district. That is so impactful. And then bringing in other stakeholders from the school district who maybe don't work in human resources or don't work in recruitment specifically, to also amplify and share their stories. That fosters that sense of connection and belonging before someone even comes to work there. And we've just spent time talking about the challenges of the profession. We know what the joys are of the profession, but
Yeah.
when the days get hard, you need to have that sense of belonging and that you're connected to somebody and to the mission of an organization to keep, you know, pushing through when you might be feeling ready to give up. And so it's not an overnight solution, Christine. It's not going to fill
Yeah.
every vacancy that a school has overnight, but we have to take a human approach to solving this problem, um, because I truly believe that's how we'll make the long term impact.
Yeah. So you're really, I mean, everything you just said, it applies to any organization that I believe you're working with. It's just that the supply and demand is different, right? It is different. And I don't have a crystal ball, but if I had to guess, this is going to be a problem that has a lot of trail. It has a lot of trail because of, again, the way industries are changing, options for who typically have gone into this profession because of the pay standards. So this is where I think educators could really be the leaders in how we solve the problem of having the right talent, right? Because that's what
Yeah.
this is, a talent crisis,
Yeah.
in a lot of ways. So, yeah, so culture, belonging, these are all the things that matter, and that all the things we want our kids to feel when they go into
Exactly.
school.
If we are not doing it for the adults, how can we expect the adults to do it for the children? It's so critical, and it ties back to what you were saying about the children having a positive experience with school so that whatever they choose to do in their future, and I probably should have said, we create all these other professions. We are educating future citizens. And so there's even a
Absolutely.
bigger impact to we want to raise empathetic, kind, thoughtful problem solvers
Yeah.
who have developed their listening skills. I mean, I know that is your wheelhouse of the work that you
Sure.
do in explicitly teaching listening skills, because in the future, these children are going to be the decision makers
The
in every
the
industry.
person you
Yeah,
have to man and trust
yeah,
me, and look, every generation thinks the last generation the next generation
yes,
sucked. So,
yeah,
but I think it's we give it such a bad rap. But let me self-indulge here, if I may.
please.
So help me understand, if you have an answer, and if you don't, it's okay. What your perspective is on why we don't teach listening in classrooms so more overtly, more structured, more. I mean, I have my own thoughts and theories and so forth, but I'd love to hear your perspective on that because I haven't met an educator yet that hasn't said this really matters.
Yeah. I
Um,
think so, I always have my perspective is usually an elementary school
yeah,
perspective. And something that I think we are getting better about in public education is a lot of elementary schools certainly are adopting social emotional learning
yeah,
curriculum. And that includes a lot of explicit teaching of a variety of social emotional skills, including listening. So I think we're getting a little bit better. I certainly was never taught
yeah.
how to listen
Nor me either,
um,
by the way.
in
That's part of
school.
my
So
story. Yeah,
I think in many ways we are doing a better job with these young people. And I'm starting to see evidence of it as a parent of teenagers. Like there are things about my teenagers, my own children and their friends that I observe and I think they're nice. These are nice kids. And I don't
yeah,
remember kids being quite so nice when I was that age. So we have to be doing something a little bit better. But we always could do it more. And I think the challenge we certainly had when I was a principal, an assistant principal, social emotional learning kind of came after my years as a
yeah.
teacher. We certainly didn't have that curriculum at that time. The challenge is always time.
Time.
And
I get it.
so while there may be a curriculum and it may be built into the schedule, it is very busy in a classroom, and if every little thing doesn't go perfectly, we may not have time for that lesson. And to tie back to your metrics point, if we have to make a decision between preserving time for mathematics instruction or reading instruction or social emotional learning instruction, I think we would both argue, and most teachers, especially at the elementary level, would argue, if we don't prioritize the social emotional learning instruction, then they're not available for the academic pieces. But what happens in reality is that gets cut out. And I think, again, when we're talking about how everyone who's listening, whether they're affiliated with the field of education or not,
Yeah,
how they can support, just having that understanding and awareness of why it's important. It may be different than the experience that you and I had and other listeners, who are older had in school. So we don't have a firsthand experience to see the value. We just have
yeah,
to hear and think about, well, why is this important? And I think of that Maya Angelou quote of, you do the best you can until you know better. And then when you know
yeah.
better, you do better. And this is an
Sure.
example of, well, we know better now. We know so many things better about how we can effectively prepare our children for college and careers and society. And this is such an important way. I mean, so many of the conflicts that I had to navigate in the leadership role as principal, in my current role, in every job that I've ever
Yeah.
had and will ever have, are because people maybe didn't feel listened to, or
Yeah.
there was miscommunication that occurred. And so I have learned and built those skills along the way and continue to refine them and get better at them through practice. And am by no means, perfect in them, but I've had to sort of be self-taught and go through the school of hard knocks
Yeah.
sometimes
Sure.
to do it
Sure.
wrong and
Yeah.
then learn the right way. But if we can get it right with our children now, um, I just
That's the
it
future.
gives me it gives me
Yeah.
so much hope for the future. It really
Well,
does.
I really appreciate your perspective on that. And I think, first of all, just so I'm clear, I don't think this is an education problem where it starts. I think this is a bigger systemic problem. This goes back to just ancient Roman times, and rhetoric has always been what the focus has been, what the output is. And if I look at not even the educational system, but even corporations and what, sales leaders talk about, and what we do in corporations is also very output focused because it's part of what we have to do. We have to get our word out. So I think it's that it's really hard to solve a problem you don't know you have. And if you've never been taught how to listen, why would you teach it? Why would you? We think it's built in. We think it's an automatic, and so I'm thrilled that social emotional learning is bringing this into the fold. I, of course, my belief is that this is also critical thinking. This is the executive functioning. This is reading, writing, and math. We just
Mhm.
haven't formulated how to teach it in those repeatable ways, and so it gets kind of snuck in rather than being a core function that I think my belief is this is what's going to change how we think, learn, and act in every facet in the future to build the future of work. So, this is where my heart lies, obviously, and I
Yeah.
love that you're self-taught and that you see those things. I think it's what great educators do, and my passion is I just want to help that cause a little bit more in so many ways to make that impact because I love the way your kids are showing up. It makes a difference.
Yeah.
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 So part of my sense is that this is part of the work that you help with leaders though is helping them tap into the various parts of themselves and how they show up in the work and how they show up to build community. But you also help them take better care of themselves, which is the other piece of this puzzle, isn't it? Others, we need to support them, but how do they help themselves?
Yeah. Yeah, I think, you're making me kind of think about speaking about the book a little bit, if that's okay,
Sure, of
because
course. Yeah.
really, my goal in writing the book, which I began shortly after I left the principalship, it was when you have a career transition like that or a major life change, there's a recalibration often that happens. And I thought, I have all of these feelings and these stories and these things inside of me and I want to get them out. And how do I want to do that? What would that look like? And I realized I wanted to write the book that I needed when I was a new principal transitioning into that role. I needed a cheerleader, a coach, someone to kind of give me some things to think about and reflect on, and speaking through that coaching lens to not tell me a blueprint of what
Yeah.
I needed to do or a checklist, but to offer me their experience and then give me some things to think about so I could put it into my own context. And so the book was born out of that. And each chapter is starts with a personal story from my experience as a principal of a school, but they're common experiences that someone in pretty much any leadership role across
Yeah.
industries might encounter. When you come new into a role, you need an entry plan. You are going to need to communicate with people. You may have to manage a crisis or two. You're going to have to deal with some staffing challenges, whether it's staffing your school, managing the people you already have, what have you. You're going to need to battle burnout and manage your own well being. Hopefully you're trying to build a legacy behind you of leaders that are coming up behind you, and then eventually you're going to have to exit a role. So that's sort of the framework for the book, and each chapter is a personal story related to that idea, on the framework. I call it the leadership lifespan that you
Mm.
go through in the time you're in a role. And then I offer some light research. I would not call it heavy duty research, but light research or tips that I found helpful. And then there are actually reflection questions with pages to write in the book
Nice.
to
Nice.
really apply it to your own work. And so, I learned so much from the things I did wrong when it came to taking care of myself and
Which is what? Give
in a
us an
leadership
example.
role.
Give
Yeah,
us
I mean, I
yeah.
think the basic example is just in whatever role we're in, if we believe in servant leadership, sometimes that can look like I give and give and give and give and give, and I do not stop, and I don't think about setting a boundary or and boundaries really are not for other people. I've learned boundaries are for yourself. You set boundaries for yourself
Yeah.
to kind of govern how you're going to interact. And so I tell the story in the book of the Friday I left for winter break one year as I was a principal, and I had spent that day pushing my cookie cart around the school to the 110 people
The
on the
literal
staff.
cookie cart.
A literal cookie cart.
Okay.
My staff always looked forward to this every year. And the cookie cart was full of dozens of cookies, Christine, that I had made myself,
Wow.
baked and frozen for weeks leading up.
Wow.
And I would put the Yule log on my laptop and the little music, and I had hot cocoa, and I'd push that cart around so everyone, literally serving everyone. And I loved it. It brought me great joy. It
Well, that
warms my
sounds
heart to think
amazing.
about
That
it.
sounds amazing.
But I left that day with a couple crumbs in the Ziploc bags that were left over, and I about dragged myself to my car with exhaustion,
I
and I
was gonna
got
say, did you
home.
drive directly to the hospital or did you
I
call an
I
ambulance?
have I mean, I got home safely, obviously, I'm here to tell the story, but I don't really remember. But I wasn't tired from pushing that cookie cart around, Christine. I was tired from the entire year and a half that had preceded that day. And I told you I was a first year principal during the pandemic. And so during that time, the lines between work and home completely erased. They didn't just blur. I had never worked from home before. And then I was in the building and staff were sort of hybrid for a year and a half. I mean, it was this, and I just felt this need to be available for people all of the time. And that wasn't allowing me to remain sharp and to take care of myself. I just felt it was something that I needed to do. So I went home that break and I realized I need a reset and I need to think like, what could that look like? And I started with a very simple, I am not going to check my email over this winter break. I'm
Mm.
going to go 8 days without checking my work
Way
email.
to
And I'm
go
going to
big. You went big.
I used my children who were younger at the time. They loved being included as accountability partners. Like,
Okay.
don't catch me checking my email. And they didn't catch me.
Wow.
And I learned from that experience everything was okay.
It's
Not
okay.
checking my work email the week between Christmas and New Year's when schools were closed was okay. And so then I thought, well, I can't just not check my email forever. That's not a
Sure.
tenable long-term solution. But what could that look like carrying it forward into my life? And I thought, well, could I set a time every night where I stop checking work email? And then can I communicate that to my staff and community? If you email me after 6 p.m., I will see it at 8 a.m. So just know that if it's an emergency, you know how to you can text me like if emergency like I need to know something before 8 a.m., you'll need to text me. And after I told the staff that, Christine, people came up to me after that meeting with tears in their eyes, hearing me say it, let them know that it was okay for
Yeah.
them to examine. And I never thought about the power. I just worried that they would think I wasn't available enough.
Available.
And instead, they had the exact opposite reaction. Like, first of all, they cared about me. So they said, I'm so happy you're doing that.
Yeah.
And second of all, it gave them the freedom. Well, if my principal is doing it, then it's okay for me to pick a time when I leave at the end of the
Yeah.
day, or a time or to preserve my Sundays for my family, even if I do a couple of hours of work on Saturday. And what works for everyone is different. That's why we're all different
Sure.
people.
Yeah.
But I have carried that with me into later roles and really tried to always model because the what we model is so much more powerful than what we tell people to do. Do as I say, not as I do doesn't
Yeah.
work
Yeah.
in the workplace. And so I've always tried to take that with me and model it for the people that I work with and that who I serve, the people on my team, that I don't want you to be working outside of work or working when you're on vacation. I'm going to support you to feel like you're prepared and you've gotten everything where it needs to be out of the office and that you have a plan when you get back. But we're going to make sure that you can actually enjoy that time off
Well,
because
this
that's going to promote. their longevity in their role.
This really does take a conversation, though. That's what I think is so important about what you're saying is that we can I mean, set the boundary. We can try to set the boundary, set this up, and you did this over your break, which I think was brave because that's a long time. That's a detox time, right?
Yeah.
Even if it's welcome. I coached one of the a school leader to do exactly what you're described, which is set an automatic reply that says, "This is when I check my email." People manage the expectations, know that there's an emergency contact, but it takes planning and then it takes communication. And it
Yes.
does take the leader's support, whether you're in an organization or in a school, to have this conversation so that people can start to protect their time while still being responsive
Yes.
in a reasonable turn.
Yeah.
Reasonable. 15
Yeah.
minutes isn't reasonable. Or
Yeah.
when I get on with customer service at something, I don't know, let's hyperbole here. Let's Pottery Barn. And sorry I kept you waiting and it was 10 seconds. I'm like, look, I admit I would have been a terrible pioneer. Like if you told me it was going to take 6 months to get across
Uh-huh.
the country,
Yeah.
but 10 seconds isn't a long wait.
Unreasonable.
We're
Yeah.
we're in such a pace that the other thing I'll say, and I appreciate what you're highlighting, it may seem obvious and simple, but prioritizing self care is so important. I was through a major life injury in my earlier life. And part of what got me through that is I always had a foundation of self care. And if you don't have that, it really makes it hard to thrive in anything that you're doing, doesn't it?
It
Yeah.
absolutely does, but I think there's two sides to this piece. I mean, one is absolutely I take very seriously the responsibility to make sure I have structures and routines in
Yeah.
place in my life for sleep, exercise, eating properly, all the things I know I need to take care of my physical and mental health and to show up at my best. And our organizations also need to have a
Totally.
culture of wellness
Yes.
because I could be the poster child, and I try to be, for all of the things I do for myself. But if I'm existing and working within a culture that doesn't support that and
Yeah.
doesn't endorse that, or that is in opposition to
Yeah.
that, then
Yeah.
I'm not going to be successful in doing it, or I'm not going to stay in the organization, right? So we have to pair both of those things, and maybe it's even bigger societally, right? Like
Yeah.
we as a society have to have your example of the expectation of an immediacy of a response is not reasonable, but
Right.
we are so accustomed
Yeah.
to immediate access to information that we become used to that. And I was playing into that before I had set some better boundaries where I probably was communicating to people through my responsiveness. Oh, if you email Julia on a Saturday at 6 p.m., you're going to hear back from
Absolutely.
her by 6:03.
Yeah.
So email her again. And so I had to, there were things I had to unlearn. And then I had to be comfortable with it's going to feel different for a
Yeah.
period of time. But I took notes. I, um, when I set the boundary for not checking email after 6 and before 8 a.m. for that, whatever that was, 14 hours a day, much of which I was sleeping, I took notes of how many times there was a time I had to break that boundary. And it was only like 3 times in 1 year that there was a true
Wow.
emergency.
Good for you
And
that you
so
even
I
documented.
needed that. I
Yeah.
needed that because I needed to be able to look back and say, because my mind will sort of spiral down to all of the what ifs. And then I had some hard data to say, but in 365 days, you only had to break. So that's a pretty good percentage. That's
Yeah.
99% of the time you were able to stick to this boundary and it was reasonable and it worked for your life. So I think you hit it in the right place. You found the right thing for you.
Well, I think this is important what you're saying because nothing's perfect. So it is risk benefit ratio, isn't it? You
Yes,
have to
that's right.
assess the risk versus the benefits. And
Yeah.
I love that your book, let me see if I get you. You wrote it from the perspective of what you would have needed when you were new to that role. So it's
Yeah.
a guide. It's a resource, it's a guide to help walk that path because there's nothing like it things being more predictable in order to make it through it in a better way. So,
Yeah.
so
And it
yeah.
helps you understand that you're not alone, right? I think I remember so many times feeling it's a leadership in whatever industry you're in can feel very lonely. It can be very isolating because often you are a team of one,
Yeah.
right? in a leadership role. And so just hearing that other people have experienced similar things, or that this is a norm. There's a whole chapter on imposter syndrome. We
Mm,
could talk another 45 minutes just
yeah.
about imposter syndrome and how that shows up. And I had never heard that term until a few years before I became a principal. So I truly thought those feelings were real, and that
Yeah.
I was alone and no one else felt that way. So I wanted to make a resource that would have helped me in that first year, and the feedback that I've gotten from people who have read it, certainly inside education, but even people who work in nonprofit and in the corporate world who have read it, have shared that there were so many things that they could relate to in the book as well, which has been really affirming.
So the impact goes from children in a classroom to leadership in in a school and a community to people across industries through your book. So where can people find you, Julia?
Yeah,
Oh,
so I have a website. It's my name, juliabialeski.com, where you can kind of find everything. I'm very active on LinkedIn and trying to get a little bit more active on Instagram. And I think all the handles and links to things like that will be in the show notes. And then the book you can find on Amazon.
wonderful. Well, it's just been delightful to talk to you. You're exuberant and infectious, not in a COVID way,
Thank you.
in a
I
good way.
understand. I appreciate that.
That used to be such a compliment to say
I
you're
know.
infectious, and now it's like, let me qualify this. But
Yeah.
I can see, I can see how little people to big people want to be around you. So it's been
Thank you.
delightful to get to know you. And as always, everyone, thank you for listening. Think about the things that Julia shared because they apply to us all, regardless of the industry, and how we can be better leaders and help ourselves and help others make an impact. So, thank you for listening today, and we'll see you soon on Shine a Light.